pause. Listen, you haven't missed your moment, and the delay is divine. The pause has a purpose. Welcome to Faith Forward with Erica J. Fields, where bold faith meets real life. And I help purpose driven people get unstuck and move in faith, even when life didn't go as planned. I'm Erica J. Fields, and I'm a pastor, a teacher, a coach, and I'm a person who's lived through delay and discouragement and even divine redirection. This podcast isn't here to impress anyone, but it's here to meet you right in the middle of your story, especially if you've been trying to hold it all together while quietly wondering, God, did I miss my moment? Listen, if you've ever felt stuck, if you've ever felt behind in life, if you've ever felt burnt out or just tired, this episode is for you. It's been over a year since my last episode, and can I tell you, the pause had a purpose. I paused with no grand announcement, not even a relaunch plan, but just silence. For a long time, I didn't know what to say about that. I told myself that I was just taking a break. But in all reality, it wasn't just a break, it was burnout and even obedience, because God had to reveal to me some patterns and some habits that I hadn't healed. I thought that I had left burnout behind me in the corporate world back when I was working 60 plus hours a week, but I found myself in that same exhausted place again. Only this time, the burnout was wrapped in purpose, in ministry, in leadership. And because it looked holy, I didn't recognize that it was still hurting me. I was showing up doing all the work, but operating out of my own strength. I was pouring out, but barely and rarely being poured into. I was encouraging others while neglecting to care for myself. And I didn't even realize that somewhere along the way, there was some disconnect happening. But God allowed everything to pause. He allowed me to slow down so that he could reveal to me the places that I have been running on empty. And even in the pause, even when I had to slow down, I had to remember Philippians 1 and 6. It says, he who begins a work in me will complete it. And how do you move on when you feel like life is stuck? How do you trust God to finish something when you barely have the energy to keep going? This hits hard for so many people, and it's not just about me. It's not just my story. Yeah, I'm in ministry and I'm a ministry leader, but for you, this might look different. Maybe your version of burnout doesn't come from sermons and sermon prep and serving in ministry. Maybe it looks like this. Maybe you're a single parent who feels like you don't get the chance to take a break. Maybe you're a caregiver caring for a loved one while still working a full-time job. Maybe you're the one that your family calls when they're short on money or they need a loan. Maybe you're a medical professional who gives your everything at work. But when you come home, you're too tired to even rest or work on your own dreams or goals. Maybe you're that entrepreneur who's juggling on the uncertainty of entrepreneurship with no real safety net. Maybe you're someone who has 2, 3, 4 jobs, just trying to stay afloat, but yet you're still not seeing breakthrough happen in your life. Maybe your marriage is falling apart quietly while you're still showing up every day in your life, while you're still worshiping and running a business like nothing's happening. Maybe you're that person who's been catching bad break after bad break. You've been applying your faith, but still finding yourself in the front of closed doors. And yet, through it all, you're still the one that people call. You're still the one showing up for others. You're still the one serving, still praying, still pressing in, but you're tired. You're questioning. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to wonder this: God, did you forget about me? Can I tell you that I've been there, where I've relied on God, where I've prayed and I've fasted and I've trusted and obeyed Him, yet still felt like nothing was shifting, nothing was changing in my life. And in those moments, I didn't just feel discouraged, I felt forgotten. I felt defeated. I felt like I was being used but not seen, faithful but overlooked, capable but secretly falling apart on the inside. For me, this episode wasn't just about coming back on the scene, but it was an invitation to stop the grind, to stop pretending, and to finally start rebuilding from a place of healing and not hustle. In 2021, research showed that 44% of people worldwide felt significant stress every single day in 2021. And among high performing professionals and ministry leaders, that number was even higher. Why was this? Because purpose often masks itself as pressure and busyness. Y'all, it's easy to keep moving when people depend on you. But without rest, without reflection and restoration, we crack under the very weight we're anointed to carry. So I want to share 3 things with us that are going to help us to move past a season of burnout. First, we've got to reflect honestly and not just emotionally. Reflection isn't about guilt or spiraling. It's about slowing down long enough to name what is really going on beneath the surface. I had to do this myself. I had to ask the question, why do I keep overcommitting? What am I afraid will happen if I stop and pause? And why do I feel guilty for taking rest? I realized I kept saying yes to things I didn't have the capacity for. Not because God was telling me to do them, but because I didn't want to disappoint others. I didn't want to look like I was lazy. But it matters that we take the time and reflect, because if we never reflect honestly, we'll keep repeating the same thing silently. And unhealed habits, they don't disappear. They just disguise themselves as responsibility. So this week, I want you to do this. Take 30 minutes, write down 3 things that have exhausted you in this season or the last season, and ask yourself, was I called to this thing? Or did I cling to it because it made me feel needed? Here's the next thing we have to do. We've got to look at reconnecting spiritually. Because faith routines are not the same as intimacy with God. I had to move beyond checking the box spiritually and truly allow myself to sit in the presence of God. I had to learn how to abide in His presence without performing. I had to relearn to be still, not just do sermon prep and outlines, but I had to get back in rhythm. If your spiritual rhythm is built on routine without relationship, you'll run dry and you'll begin to wonder why the fire is gone. So this week, instead of that, I want you to try getting back into rhythm. Ask yourself, what connects me to God now? Maybe it's walking. Maybe it's silent. Maybe it's scripture reading. Maybe it's breathing. Maybe it's music. Whatever it is, get back to that and let it count. Lastly, let's respond intentionally. When things finally came to a point where I found my rhythm again, I felt the pressure to prove to myself that I still had it. But God asked me this: was I building from identity or insecurity? Instead of recording a full season of episodes and jumping back into business during a busy time in ministry, I decided I just needed to start. Just record one episode, just this one episode, with intention and not impulse. Why? Because desperate energy, impulsive energy, leads to cycles of burnout, but intentionality creates room for longevity and power, peace, and rest. So as you start moving forward on your goal, on your vision, on your dream, choose one area that you can restart, not out of guilt, but out of grace, and ask, what's my one next step that I can take today? Listen, you're not behind, but you are being rebuilt in this season. And just like me, your pause has a purpose, and you're still carrying the promises of God on your life. If this episode spoke to you today, don't just listen and move on to it. Reflect and respond. I've created a reflection guide and a devotional worksheet to help you sit with what you've heard and reflect on it in your own journey and start rebuilding from a deeper place. It has scripture and journal prompts and personal reflections. It's something I wish that someone had handed me during my own pause. And you can download it now at the link in the description. And when you do, I love it if we can stay connected. So just enter your name, email, and phone number so I can keep pouring into you in this season of your journey with resources, with encouragement, and of course, future episodes. So let's build together. Let's rebuild together. Let's move forward in faith together. And I want to remind you this. Listen, you haven't missed your moment, and the delay is divine. The pause has a purpose, and your story is still being written by God. And God is working in you and through you. So don't rush. Let's honor this rebuilding season, because if God can move in the silent moments, He certainly can move through you. Y'all, subscribe, share, and download the episode devotional worksheet. This, y'all, is just the beginning. So let's rebuild together. Faith forward. Let's go.